Hi guys, it's Miss Fry. It's time for chapter 3 of I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan. Let's get started. There was a car parked in front of the James house when Julie pulled into the driveway. Her first thought was that Bud had come early, but a second glance told her that this was not Bud's cream-colored Dodge. The front door of the house stood open, and through the screen voices floated to her as she crossed the lawn and mounted the steps to the front porch. One voice was her mother's, lifted with an unaccustomed gaiety. The second voice stopped her. For a long moment Julie stood frozen, caught and held, unmoving. Then her mother, who was seated on the far side of the living room, facing the doorway, glanced up and saw her. "Julie, look who's here! It's Ray!" Julie opened the screen and went into the room, drawing the solid door closed behind her. "Hi," she said a bit stiffly. "I saw the car outside, but I didn't recognize it." "It's my dad's," Raymond Bronson said, getting to his feet. He stood there awkwardly, as though wondering what sort of greeting to offer. Then he held out his hand. "How are you, Jules?" "Okay," Julie said. "Fine." She went forward and put her hand in his, holding it formally, then releasing it. It was a harder hand than she remembered. "I didn't know you were back. Your last card was from the coast. You said you were working on some kind of fishing boat." "I was," Ray said. "The guy who owns the boat has a kid who works with him in the summers. There wasn't room for both of us." "That's too bad," Julie said, because she could think of nothing else to say. "Not really. Jobs like that are on again, off again. I was about ready to come home for a while anyway." He was waiting for her to sit down, so she did. Not beside him on the sofa, but in the armchair facing him. He took his seat again. "Your mom's been telling me about you're getting your go-ahead from Smith. That's great. You must have really been hitting the books." "She has," Mrs. James said with pride. "You wouldn't have known her this year, Ray. I don't know whether it's because you haven't been here to keep her out half the night, or whether she just suddenly decided to buckle down, but the results have been remarkable." That's great," Ray said again. Mrs. James rose. "I've got a cake waiting to be iced in the kitchen, and I know you kids have a lot of catching up to do. I'll bring you out a piece when I get it done." "I can't stay long," Ray said. "I have a date," said Julie, "in just a few minutes." She didn't meet his eyes when she said it, although she knew, of course, that he probably would have expected her to have had a date on a Friday night. He had undoubtedly done his own share of socializing out in California. She wondered what he would think of Bud. Bud was so far from the type of boy she had dated in school, so far from Ray's type, though Ray himself had changed tremendously since she had seen him. He looked older. He was very tan. His light hair grew thick and long down over his ears, and his brows were bleached pale over his cat-green eyes. As Helen had reported earlier, he had grown a beard. It was short and stubby and looked as though it belonged on someone else's face. They sat in awkward silence after Mrs. James left the room. Then they both spoke at once. "It's nice that you—" Julie began, and Ray said, "I just thought—" They both stopped speaking. Then Julie said carefully, "It's nice that you came by." "I thought I'd say hello," said Ray. "I've thought about you a lot. I just wanted to see how you were." "I'm fine," Julie repeated, and the green eyes that knew her so well, that had seen her through so many situations, through parties and picnics and cheerleading tryouts, and being caught cheating on a math test, and coming down with a rare case of the chicken pox right before homecoming. Those eyes kept looking in disbelief. "You don't look fine," Ray said. "You look like hell. Has it been dragging on you like this ever since?" "No," Julie said. "I don't think about it." "I don't believe you." "I don't," Julie told him. "I don't let myself." She lowered her voice. I made up my mind right after the funeral. I knew if I kept thinking, well, what good would it have done? People go crazy dwelling on things they can't change. She paused. I sent him flowers. Ray looked surprised. You did? I went down to People's Flower Shop and bought some yellow roses. I had them delivered without my name on them. I know it was silly. I just couldn't help it. It was just, I felt I had to do something and I couldn't think of anything else. I know, Ray said. I felt the same way. I didn't think about sending flowers. I kept waking up at night and seeing that curve in the road again. That bicycle coming up suddenly out of the dark like that, and I'd feel the thud, and then the bump as the wheels went over it. I'd lie there and shake. That's why you went away. It was a statement, not a question. Isn't that why you're going to Smith? To get away from here? You've never cared that much about college. You used to talk about maybe taking computer courses or something right here in town while I went to university. Going east to school was the last thing you had on your mind. Barry's at the U now, Julie said. He's on the football team. I saw Helen yesterday at lunch. She looked pretty. She's a future star, Julie said. Did you know? Channel 5 had this beauty contest thing based on photographs, and Helen won it. She's got a full-time job representing the station for all kinds of things, giving spot announcements and small news reports. She even DJs her own webcast in the afternoons. Great, Ray said. Are they still together? I guess so. I saw them today. Julie shook her head. I don't know how Helen can do it. Keep going with him, I mean. She was there. She saw him that night. She heard the things he said. How can she still think he's so wonderful? How can she even stand to have him touch her? It was an accident, Ray reminded her. God knows Barry didn't plan it. It could have been me driving the car. It would have been if I hadn't won the toss for the back seat. But you would have stopped, Julie said. There was a long silence as the words hung there between them. Would I? Ray asked at last. Of course, Julie said sharply. And then, wouldn't you? Who knows? Ray shrugged his shoulders. I tell myself I would have. You think I would have. But how can we know? How can you know how anybody's going to react in a situation like that? We'd all had a few beers and smoked a little pot. It happened so fast. You called for the ambulance. You wanted to go back. But I didn't insist on it. You wanted to go back too, but we didn't. We let Barry talk us into the pact. I could have held out, but I didn't. I must have wanted to be talked into it. I'm no better than Barry, Jules, so don't try to make him the Black Knight and me the prince on the white horse. It just isn't that way. You're as bad as Helen, Julie said. The both of you, you formed the great society for admiring Barry Cox. You'd stick up for him no matter what he did. You should have heard her tonight begging him to call her this weekend. And here they are, supposedly a couple. It's just so degrading. I don't see anything degrading about sticking by your guy if you care about him. Ray's brows drew together in that quizzical look she knew so well. What were you doing at Helen's anyway? I thought you'd burned all your bridges and that you were cutting ties with all of us. I have, Julie told him. That is, I meant to. Today I got a letter in the mail. It upset me, and I called Helen. And then she called Barry, and suddenly there we all were, hashing it over. I wish now I just chucked it and not made such a big deal out of it. Ray looked interested. What sort of letter? Just a prank thing. Helen says she gets them sometimes, and phone calls and email too. But I never got any before, so I overreacted. She opened her purse and fished out the envelope. Here it is if you want to see it. Ray got up and came over and sat on the arm of her chair, taking the letter out of her hand. He opened it and read it. Barry thinks it was written by some kid, Julie said, that it doesn't really mean anything. It just happened to have hit on something that struck a nerve. She paused, watching his face as he studied the black line of printing. Is that what you think? It's possible, Ray said, but it's one hell of a coincidence. Why pick on you? Do you know anybody who could have sent it? Barry thought maybe some boy from school. You said you were dating. He raised his eyes from the paper. This guy you're going out with tonight, is he the practical joker type? As far from it as you can get, said Julie. Bud's a nice guy, older, serious about everything. He was in the army and fought in Iraq. The last thing he'd ever do is write silly notes. Are you in love with him? The question was so sudden, so far from the previous discussion, that she was unprepared. No, she said. But is he with you? I don't think so. Maybe a little. Please, Ray, this is just a nice guy I met one day in the library. He asked me out, and Mom had been bugging me about never going anywhere anymore, so I went. And then it was just easy to keep on. Besides, what difference does it make to you? You and I weren't a thing anymore. We're not a thing anymore. Aren't we? He reached out a hand and placed it gently under her chin, tilting her face up so that it was raised to his. The face that looked down at her was familiar, darker, and stronger than she had remembered it, framed with shaggy hair and a beard. But the eyes were the same. No stranger could ever look at her through Ray's green eyes. It's still there, he said. You know it is. You could feel it just the way I could the moment you walked into the room. We had a good thing, too, for too long. We can't just let it go. That's how it has to be, Julie said. I mean it, Ray. I really do. It's the only way we'll ever forget. I'm going to leave here, leave all the people and places connected with that horrible night, and never look back. It's over and done with. There's no repairing it. So I'm going to erase it. And you think that's possible? His voice was sad. Sweetie, something like that doesn't get erased. I thought maybe it could be too there in the beginning. That's why I packed up and took off. New places, new people. I thought that would do it, but it didn't. You can't run away. You at Smith and me out in California, it's still there with us. I finally realized that. It's why I came home. If you can't run away, Julie said chokingly, what can you do? Face up to it. Do you mean break the pact? No, Ray said. We can't do that, but we can talk to the others. We can dissolve the pact if we're all in agreement. Never. Barry will never agree to it, and if he won't, Helen won't. The doorbell rang. Ray's hand dropped to his side. He got up from the armchair. That must be your friend. I guess so. He was picking me up at 8. Julie's eyes went nervously from Ray's face to the door. Don't worry, I'll behave myself. I'll probably even like him. He's got good taste in girls anyway. They went to the door together, and Julie introduced them. Bud said, Raymond Bronson? You any relation to Booter Bronson, who runs the sporting goods store? His son, Ray told him. I hear you just got back from Iraq. I sure don't envy you that gig. They shook hands civilly and stood and talked for a few moments in a pleasant fashion, as though they might have been friends if given the chance. Then Ray left, and Julie excused herself and went upstairs to comb her hair. When she came down, Bud was still standing there by the door, as he had been when she left him. He looked up at her and smiled as she came down the stairs, and for an instant she felt like crying because his smile was a nice one and because his eyes weren't green. Okay, that's the end of chapter 3. See you for chapter 4.